actually 34 years that I've been doing freelance journalism, and sometimes I even get paid for it. Hello, everyone. We started out on this project following the December Blueprint meeting, trying to figure out what's the business model for getting paid for content or creating value for content that was sustainable in the digital era. And the analysis quickly led us down to a path that said, this is a much bigger structural issue from an economic standpoint, the economics of producing content, than just the mere notion of can you find a new payment mechanism or a new business model that allows content to be paid for in a traditional sense. And that led us into a fairly lengthy exposition of what we think is the perfect storm that's hitting the industry, obviously compounded by the weakened economy. So I'm going to run through quickly about 25 slides that just tells you some of the information that we went through without belaboring you to go through the details. It's a voluminous amount of work that's really aimed at saying we've got to solve a holistic issue here and not just come up with a clever way for people to pay. It has to do with how do you translate the value of content provided in a digital era where people are on the go and experiencing a very different lifestyle than the current economics of the business are set up to serve. So we had 4 different components that we looked at. One's a fairly lengthy situation assessment. And again, just at a very high level, and I'll flip through this stuff so you guys can get a feel for what we've done and how to interact with us going forward. But obviously there's a whole bunch of negative things that are impacting the business. There are also some positive ones too. There are some very encouraging things about what consumers are doing, particularly digitally savvy consumers, with respect to wanting to know and consume more news, but they need to do it through mobile devices. They need to do it in more personalized ways online and the like. In order to figure out how to sustain news in the current situation, there's a lot that has to do with coalescing points of view within the industry itself. A lot of the media coverage in the past 4 or 5 months has focused on paywalls and pay content, not so much on reinventing the reader-advertiser model, which seems to be the case because that's at the foremost priority right now because of the foundation economically that advertising provides content providers and has traditionally for hundreds of years. We came up then with a whole list of initiatives that some of which are being embodied in the industry, many of which are still to be developed, and we think RJI will provide a significant role in doing that. But more importantly, convening a conference like this is really trying to say, let's get as an industry together to reinvent the business model, the economic foundation for it, and in particular the reader-advertiser relationship. So again, I'm just going to flip through a whole bunch of these real quickly and get to the meat of what the panel is going to be discussing. But it's clear the first impact of Web 1.0, and I'll come to an example of what I mean by Web 1.0 versus other 1.5, 2.0, and 3.0. But it's a perfect storm, and it requires a tremendous amount of sustainability because the technology is changing and moving very, very quickly, most of which is in the negative direction as affects the economics of providing content. So as you can see, there's a lot of components of this, and again, I'm not trying to cover any of this other than tell you what's available and the extent of which we went through it. But then we decided that it's important to break it down into the component parts. So how do you repair reader relationships? And there are a number of things we have listed here. In particular, I just note one of the bullet points, the digital savvy group. If you've seen the Scarborough research, there's 6% of the population that really drives most of the online business. They're very voracious news consumers, but they get very little of it from newspapers, as an example. But if you can get the digital savvy group to endorse what you're doing and to buy your new business model, the upside is great tremendous because they lead the rest of society in terms of new technology adoption. Similarly, there's a lot of things, and not the least of which is behavioral advertising, that's aimed at trying to get advertisers to come back to the content provision model and not continue to stray with Google and other folks who are trying to reinvent the advertising value proposition. The classified business isn't dead, but if you look at the problem Craigslist has had recently with the sellers of services that are now under challenge by most of society, and the fact that you don't really understand who's providing the reviews on, say, Angie's List, there is an opportunity to come back and reinvent classifieds, particularly, we think, with a social network format that some newspapers are already endorsing and others are starting to pursue. But ultimately, you want to try to replace the subscription revenue with a sustaining relationship that may be for this ephemeral readers, something that's a straight paid relationship, but with more committed readers might be a way where they can earn their content by doing a lot of things in a social network kind of setting that would enhance the business prospects of the content providing organization. So that's what's in there, and Bill will have, along with all the other resources, he has a lot of that stuff available. But Web 2.0 is connecting people to information. We've gone through that. I would argue we're in Web 1.5 now, where Google and Amazon and PayPal and other people are reinventing a lot of businesses, not just newspaper business, banking in particular, where I spend a lot of my time. We're in Web 2.0 with social networks and blogs and collaborative venues, and those, I think, are very profound. Much more so ultimately than Web 1.0, which really just allows you to get at information that really gives the clever researcher the ability to control things like pricing and how they transact. But ultimately, we're going to get something called Web 3.0 that people are already working on, where you essentially create a conceptual matching on things like searches and things that you're interested in viewing and reading and consuming. And that's really exciting because I think, as you'll see real quickly, it'll put the newspaper industry back on the offense if it survives Web 2.0. So the old newspaper business, pre-2000, everybody knows advertising and classified supported a lot of subscription revenues added in, but there was emerging technology challenges, particularly from video. And again, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. The disruptive impacts of the movement online, we all know, and we've seen with Web 2.0, the movement of CPMs down and the movement of advertising to the online venues. So it hasn't been friendly to us. And then you had Google in particular, but also Yahoo and others, come in and that essentially tried to reinvent how you capture advertising and capture eyeballs, and basically taking your content for free and then putting it into their own business models. So that is a troubling scenario if not addressed. And we have looked at ways to address that and how to intervene. There are a number of them here. Again, there's ample information to explain all of these in detail. But now we're already into Web 2.0, where readers are migrating to this social interactive model, where they're interacting people to people. And this is where they're spending a tremendous amount of their time. And because they're spending their time there, ultimately their transactions, their economic activity, the financial services they use, and how they consume anything else around them is really going to be determined. So it's not just what Google and Amazon and the other 1.5 guys are doing that impacts it. It's the fact that they're finding their own places to go to spend their time. You could take an alternative path to embrace Web 2.0 as opposed to be further disadvantaged by it. And we think that, and it's certainly being borne out in some of the early experiments, the newspaper industry is a natural for social networking, and that you could convert a lot of what happens in the reader's head and the advertiser's pocketbook with respect to what a newspaper does, all in a social network venue. So if you look at the green bar on the top there, you can start to get toward paid content, content collaboration, classified social exchanges, personalized advertising and promotions. You can sustain third-party networks. It could be the newspaper industry's own third-party networks. You can get to more interesting and enhanced advertising that's allowed by the technology, facilitated by the technology. But all of this really gets at reinvention of the buyer-seller relationship, the reader-advertiser relationship. And so a lot of the notions that we were exploring and that we think some embodiments will support going forward are getting readers to earn their way through the content by doing a lot of things that they're going to do in social networks anyway, but in a more organized and a more monetizable fashion through newspapers and social networks, including the ability to do the paid content. So there's many more things that we think can be done, and here's just a small list of them, to embrace Web 2.0 as opposed to being mowed down by it, and to prepare ourselves for Web 3.0, where content really moves to a whole new stage, and both in a cerebral sense, but we think also in a business sense, where you really do get into the reader's mind, wherever they are, however their lifestyle is pursued, in a way that the best content providers, let me say that as at least a political word, can guide that through. So I'm thinking as an example, Hulu versus YouTube. So has anybody here used Hulu before, gone to Hulu? Okay, do you find that more satisfying than YouTube as a place to view videos and professional content? So most people do. So now we're at a situation where we're saying, okay, we've been to the wild frontier and now we have a chance to pull back and do something that makes more sense. So we think there's also a number of things, and RJI is exploring a number of these for Web 3.0 that puts newspapers back on the offense. So if I take it all together and put it into this model as a very high-level summary, there's tons of things we can do. So this is not hopeless by any extent. It's a matter of how we collaborate and bring our resources together to drive the reinvention of the business model. So for the panel's point of view, with that as a background, what you're seeing with Web 2.0 is a lot of these 1.5 guys, Google, PayPal, Amazon Payments, moving from a paradigm that said we're reinventing the payments business and how people communicate electronically in the World Wide Web environment, and we're going at each other. Most recently, Amazon Payments announced that they were going to give up to $2 million in processing of payments free of charge through September for anybody who switches from Google's AdWords payment mechanism to Amazon's. And then after that, everybody's got the same price, all three of these guys. Pretty interesting. I hope that the FTC is looking at that. Google is moving out of its rather flattening model into more behavioral advertising. A couple of months ago, they introduced this self-profiling capability to try and get at how you can tie more specific ads to more specific human beings who would drive up CPMs and attract more advertising to Google. One of the most interesting developments in this regard, and you'll hear more about this as we go forward, is the information card, which is not a card. It's an electronic facsimile or representation of a card that allows you to put in a lot of personalized information, who you are, what your demographics are, what your product preferences and plans might be. And you can do this anonymously to websites that accept the information card. You can even embed, as you can see, PayPal and B of A and others are providing instantiations of this. You can do your payments completely transparently, and the merchant, the website never sees your account information, which solves a whole lot of other problems, but also gives you the ability, if you want, to have a very intimate interaction with the advertiser or the group trying to sell products to you. PayPal has essentially reinvented the banking transaction business. They're 13% market share online, growing at 25%. The rest of the industry is going at about 6 or 7%. They become the 800-pound gorilla in this space, and they basically did it at the bank's expense. This year, they will take $1.5 billion that used to be bank transaction fees off the table and put it in their own pocket. And now you've got the ultimate retailer, mega retailer, omni retailer in the online space, Amazon, with a payment service that allows anybody who builds a website to become a reseller of payment capabilities. And the payment capabilities are on probably the biggest and most effective payment platform in the world today, certainly in the digital world. So that really changes the game, because it says if you can create an online service or even a mobile service, you never have to see the conventional payments industry. You never have to go and pay bank fees. You just have to work with people who have these huge platforms built out in piggyback on what they're doing. More importantly, and I'd offer to the panel to discuss this, I see the mobile transformation as being one of the epic events in certainly commercial history, but also I think in human history. The two-way, real-time, always on, always with you, knows where you are, one-to-one kind of capability that mobile devices provide, particularly for the Gen Y crowd of people under 30. It's paralyzing if you don't embrace it, and I think it's empowering if you do. And finally, a slide for the panel to suggest paid content options. There's no clear winner yet. There's lots of them out there. It depends on your business model, depends on what kind of grasp you want to have of your reader, of your customer. Some of these are successful in certain instances. None of them have really been embraced as a generic solution, and there's probably not a generic solution. If you look in conventional payment space, the cheapest way to get a $1 content transaction done is probably with Amazon.com using a bank account or a debit card. So you've got, and that's still not good enough in terms of the cost. The cost should get down to a few pennies or perhaps less to really provide the kind of economics that we were originally looking for in this project.